Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we are most excited to have back on the show Dan Moore, who is a member of the Hidden Fraternity of Light, or actually it's the Fraternity of Hidden Light, and has been researching the Hermetic Cabalah for over 50 years. And he has been on the show now 3 other times. We met him the first time we talked about his background and Hermetic Cabalah and a little of that. In general, he talked about alchemy on a second show, and he was part of our magical panel, which was really a lot of fun. So we're really thrilled to have him back. And this time he's going to be talking about the 32 Paths of Wisdom and the 3 Orders of the Great Work, which is obviously a huge topic. So we're not going to cover it all, but we're going to go a little deeper into the tree today, which I'm really thrilled to do. So before we get started, though, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our episode again. We're happy to have Dan on. We've got some really great shows coming up. We have our herbalist and witch, Renee Starr, who we've been trying to have on for quite a while next week, and she's amazing. So should have a lot of fun with her. Next month, we're going to have Jason Miller on. We had to reschedule him because we had some technical problems, but he'll be joining us. We've got great shows coming up in October. We're going to have some of our paranormal people. We'll sort of celebrate Halloween with some Halloween-themed shows, some of our witch friends and so forth. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. You can also listen to the show as a podcast. If you just search Sixth Sense Society on Spotify or iTunes, we're pretty easy to find. So if you're out and about and you want to listen in, you can do that too. Buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi if you're on the website, or subscribe to our newsletter, and so we can let you guys know what's going on. We do have some tarot classes we're going to be doing in September. It's going to be our last set for the year, so you can email us or just check on the website for that as well. So I'm going to let you guys go back to Krista because we have a fascinating guest, and I don't want to take up too much of your time today, so take it away, Krista.
Great. Thanks a lot, Michael, and welcome back to the show, Dan.
Well, good day, Krista and Michael. Thank you for having me again. I enjoy these very much.
Well, we do too, and I think the audience does as well. We had a lot of good feedback from your previous shows, and I think you have a way of making a difficult topics really accessible to many people. So let's get started with this broad show that we're jumping into. And why don't you start with sort of talking about the 3 orders that you... Now, this is, again, how Dan has learned it and how he perceives it and teaches it. And my understanding is this correct, Dan, is a lot of this is based a lot on Rosicrucian ideas, too.
Yes, it is. And in fact, the popularistic outlet in the late 19th century was the Golden Dawn. This was the system of grades and orders that they functioned by. But it is much older than the Golden Dawn and has direct connections to 18th century continental organizations, which existed like the Gold and Rosy Cross and others. So what it is we take the Kabbalistic tree of life, and there are certain grades of consciousness which are divided into 3 unique orders. And this forms an entire system of training and development, which integrates things like tarot, like alchemy, astrology, and magic into a complete overview of a system of spiritual development and perfection for us as human beings, a word that means literally to be more than mankind. So that is the basic part of it. And I know I sent you guys a wonderful poster I did a number of years back, which show kind of like a map of all of those on there. I think I sent that to you.
Yeah, and I think most people that have been introduced to the Western occult mysteries have seen some particular map of the different paths and the numbers and the grades. And when I first saw it, I found it very overwhelming, the amount of information just on the trees itself and some of the way it's designated. Like in the different sephira, how they will designate the different level that you're on with the actual number with the sephira. I forget what it's like, 6 equals 5 or whatever that is. And I was like, what does that mean? So one of my questions when looking at your outline you sent us is, how does one not get initially just completely overwhelmed, even if I'm taking a class? And is that part of a teacher's job to sort of break it down in a way that you'll be able to digest it?
I think it's kind of like, to use a human analogy, it's like teaching a baby or a child to swim. You dip their toe in the water, and then they see, oh, that's what water is like and whatnot. And they learn how to hold their breath, and that they can float, and if they can float, they can swim, stuff like that. So yes, it's a vast amount of stuff, and it's kind of like you got to read the 300 plus volumes of Vedanta, for example, or learn to study the 300 million Hindu gods. It's an overwhelming subject. We're talking about all of life and what is beyond what we understand as this physical life. So basically, I am working on a series of courses. One of them is already out there, which is designed in a way to make these much more accessible so that you can get a real world handle, a conceptual handle on what this is all about and this tradition. And the idea that I wanted to do is to present it in such a way that it is meant to augment or complement whatever you're studying. If you're not studying Cabalah, but Wicca or something in an Eastern tradition, you can study this and see how it will complement what you are studying and expand upon it and give you a different point of view to look at whatever you're looking at. Because these traditions, whatever they are, there are many different paths up this mountain of spiritual attainment, but they all end in the same culmination. They go to the same apex and peak. And that's what the idea was behind this course that I've kind of put together. And it's the first of 3. And the second one, which if we get this one to go, now I might write it anyway, even if it doesn't go, is to begin to get you involved in practical experience, either magically and or through guided meditation and so forth, into what all these different symbols and levels of consciousness that are on this map. That's what the Tree of Life is. It is a map, like a blueprint of creation, with all of these different aspects of consciousness that we all possess.
Yeah, and that's something I recall you wrote in the part you sent to us. You were talking about it being a map of the interior kingdom that we were born to rule. And so my question was, how is this, by working, because this takes dedication, even if you, let's say you make it a little more practical and accessible, but it's fairly a lot of work. And so what is it that you think people should know that it can do for people that integrates into living a harmonious life? Now, obviously, if I'm a spiritual being, let's say my spiritual desire is just to become enlightened, but that's a different like motivation than, let's say I want to use spirituality to be a really good nurse, and I want to improve my life as a nurse, and I want to be in this world, and I want to also have a spiritual reality. So I think what I've found with Cabalah, the way it's sometimes presented through the magical world, it seems like there's a split there. And but I don't feel that from you. So can you sort of talk about that a little bit?
I think the idea is that we are trying to find out more what and who we are about, what we are as human beings. That's an important term to understand, that it refers directly to the transcendental aspect of ourselves. We realize on a mundane level that we have a great many latent abilities that are not realized. We have an inherent divinity that is not realized. And any system of spiritual development, initiatory system into the mysteries, what have you, is meant to make us wake up to this. And as we wake up to it, then we begin to understand how amazing this precious miracle of life really is and what nature is. If you use the example of being a nurse, well, this is someone who's in the healing arts. They're in medicine. They want to be caretaker to their brothers and sisters to help them get better and to feel better and so forth. And what exactly does that mean? And how does it relate to me directly? And how does it come to being, giving service to all of life? How do I use subtle little talents that I may have to bring about all of this stuff? How could I use my speech in such a way that actually makes people understand and relax and feel better? How could I use my touch? And we talk about healing with the laying on of hands to make someone feel better. How can I come into a room and instantly feel what someone is struggling with or suffering with, their pain, their fear, their depression? These are all the things that anyone who follows a spiritual tradition is interested in developing, and that's why they're kind of drawn to it.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. I think that's really important because I think that at least, for instance, in the path of Buddhism, there's different paths for everyone. There's the lay path, there's the monk path, there's all these. And I think that it's true in magic, but I think maybe we just see from the books that are published and well known that it seems like you have to be a magician or a practicing professional witch to do all this, rather than I just want to be a salesman, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that if that's what you feel called to. And I think that it's good to let people know that so that they don't feel alienated from these traditions.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's in a way, it's going back to our predecessors who were not primitive. They were ancient, but not primitive. And tribalistic consciousness meant that they had this connection with nature in such a way that in some respects we have lost in our 20th and 21st century lives. And this is an idea to become like that. So in all the books, which, you're into the occult, you go to the bookstore, you spend all your money, you get books, you read books, and you do some stuff and whatnot. And the way I've tried to write this course is in such a way that it's a journey that we are all taking. I'm not talking down to anybody or anything like that. These are potentials we all have. These are experiences either you have had or you will have them. And that is the idea behind this. I like that kind of idea, that there's no sense of competition. There's a sense of we are fellow journeyers on this. Maybe I know a little bit more about some things, but I'm no less of a student than anybody else who might talk to me or pick up some of my materials and read them and so forth.
So tell me a little bit about the differences in the orders, the three orders.
Okay. And for those of you who are familiar with the Tree of Life, the first four Sephirot on the diagram of the Tree of Life, which is at the bottom of this glyph, you have a glyph with 10 circles and 22 interconnecting paths. That's the most familiar one. There are a couple of others that are similar, but that's the most familiar one that's used in Western practice. So the first circle is called the kingdom, or Malkut. And it has to do with the kingdom of nature into which we are all born. The second one is Yesod, meaning the basis or foundation. And the first one is Zelator as far as the grade of consciousness goes. And the reason it's called Zelator is because myself and probably you and a lot of other people who are drawn to this, they have an experience which is just, it is overwhelming, and it's not like anything they can compare it to. And for some reason, there is this innate understanding that, hey, somehow everything is one, everything is alive, everything is conscious. And I believe this because of what I've experienced. I'm not trying to convince anybody else, but how do I find out more about it? So the next grade is Theoricus, where you study the theory, the basis of all of that. And as it becomes sense to you, what is meant if everything truly comes as the ultimate source of being, makes everything one, conscious and alive, what does that mean? Well, then you begin to do practical things with it, like we talked about here. And it could be magic and it could be other stuff, but it's practical application of the knowledge you've gained. And then as you go through that and you have your experiences, it leads you on to something called Philosophus. And Philosophus, the last of the four grades, means the love of wisdom. Wisdom is the highest and best use of your knowledge and your experience. So you go through the practical work to become wise. And that is the basis of what's called the first or outer order. And the reason it's called the outer order is because there's a great deal of emphasis on observation and insight. We are trying to develop the ability to have spiritual insight, to see what's going on beneath the surface and to understand that. Okay, so that's the first order. The second order is called the inner order of the greater mysteries. The first are called lesser, but they're not inferior. They are simply preparatory for what comes next. So the inner order has to do with your exploration of that interior kingdom, which somehow connects you with everything else. Because one of the basis of this is the Hermetic Cabalah, is what it says in something called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. As above, so below. The way I like to think of it is as within, so without. So now you develop that and you see there's these three grades of adeptship. You're becoming adept at everything you learned in the first order. And there's a lesser adept, a greater adept, and finally exempt, elect, or eminent adept. And that's where you develop that. And your latent potentials and the perfection of you as a human being is beginning to realize full fruition, the blooming of this rose upon the cross, the opening of the heart. So the third and highest order.
Now, before you go into that one, why is this one, the second order, called the Ordeal?
Well, it's actually, there's a little space between first and second order. And that is, there are three paths that you have to deal with in what you have learned in your observations and whatnot about the unity of all things. Because the three paths have these three cards associated with these tarot cards. So the first path that you're going to deal with is Ayin, the eye, and this is appearances, but it's also associated with the devil. And most people think of the devil as evil. So what is evil? How does that affect us? What is that all about? You know? And then we learn to deal with that. And then the second one is even better for noon on the other side. And that's attributed to the death card. So first evil and now death. And these are probably two of the most scariest things that any of us in the human condition must deal with. But there's a reconciliation for all of this. And it's an ordeal to come to it. And that is the path of trial, probation, and whatnot. So Samik is related to temperance. And you see this vision of an angel, which is what is called the holy guardian angel within this tradition. At Zelator, there's a spiritual experience that talks about the vision of this holy guardian angel. When you get into the second order, finally, after going through this ordeal, which is like neophyte adept, okay? Like we have a neophyte for first order, there's a neophyte adept. When you get into that, then you finally have the knowledge of and conversation with this holy guardian angel. So that is the reconciliation between these two things. What does this mean, this evil and this death that we have in our lives? Now, I'm not going to try and give you the answers to that. It's something everybody else has to come up on their own, and I could give little hints and clues, and I do in the lessons that I've come up with, so that you go through this, and that's what it's like. It's the part that integrates what you learned in the first order, in the outer mysteries, and what you learned about your insight, to begin to apply it to becoming an adept, knowing what you're doing and applying it effectively. Because in the Rosicrucian tradition, as you mentioned at the first manifesto, the fame of the fraternity, or in Latin, all the highbrow documents were in Latin. It's called Fama Fraternitas. It said, you shall claim no dignity or power, but to cure the sick, and that for free.
Yeah, so I remember that from a previous show.
Directive.
Yeah. Previous show when Christopher was on, he talked a lot about that whole healing aspect, and I had never heard that before because I don't know much about Rosicrucianism, so it was really interesting, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what it's all about. It's very clear what all of this is about and so forth. So you go through this ordeal, and it's not like a one-time thing. You're constantly going through it as you're dealing with very unique situations of life, you know, and I mean, you just look at the human condition and all the suffering we go through personally and community-wise and with our relatives and on nation level. I mean, it's very, very obvious right now, all this kind of stuff. So then eventually, you come to this idea of mastership, whatever that may be. Because the top 3 grades, the third and what is truly an invisible order, because it exists purely internally, it has 3 grades. There is the divine understanding of Bina, which is related to the master of the temple. And that also relates to the highest aspect of the human soul structure, something called the neshama, and that is the immortal divine aspect of the soul. And then on the other side, you have divine wisdom, and there's something there called the chaya, which means the life force itself, and that's related to being a magician. So you have the master of the temple, then you have the magician, which is the master of the temple, if you will. And finally, you have the crown, which is a grade in Latin called ipsissimus. That literally means the one who knows the self most. And in there is this technical Kabbalistic term called yechida, and that is a feminine form of the Hebrew noun for yehud, meaning unity. So it is this passive unity that always is, and that we recognize and remember and come back to. One of the famous sayings is, it's not that the world changed. The world has always been this way. It's that you changed. Your perception of it changed. And that's what initiation is all about.
So it's quite a lot of material, but also it seems to me like a lot to realize as an individual if you're fortunate to get to through the second order. To me, that seems like that would be a lot of an accomplishment. And so is it true that if you progress that there are signs, I know in Buddhism there are signs of real progression that the teachers see in students, and you might not even know that they're the signs. Do you have something similar in that there's certain common things that happen so you can say, oh, this person's really getting this, they're really changing, and then what would be some of those signs in each of the orders?
Well, I don't know. We'll talk about the path generally rather than try and categorize them per se. But generally speaking, it's an idea of becoming more of a human being. Are you more empathetic? Do you appreciate what your fellow beings, physical, and if you're into the theurgy or the magic, non-physical, are going through? I mean, our interaction with elemental beings and spirits since 2006, they're extremely upset with us and what we're doing to the world. Okay. And the shamans echo all of that. So there's this kind of thing of becoming much more sensitive and aware, and then learning how to control and deal with that. Because there are people, I'm sure you've met, and maybe yourself, they're empathetic and they have stuff, and then they go, I can't go in here. I can't be around this person.
All right.
It's just too overwhelming. They don't know how to deal with it. So the adept aspect, the inner order work, is learning how to deal with all of this and to have some kind of control over it and to be able to interact with it in an effective way. That's not easy. Yeah, it's hard. Climbing up the mountain of spiritual attainment is a hard thing. That's why that hermit's got his staff there. That staff is the tradition, the ageless wisdom that we all seek and look for. It helps you up the mountain.
Well, I was listening to, I forget which one, this really good theosophical YouTube, and the man on there was talking about that as you go up the mountain, and I personally never heard this, but you probably have, that instead of it gets much harder as you get to the top. And I have to say that was so, I felt so relieved, because when I first started my practices, I feel like I really grew quickly. Like I felt like I had, progress right away. And then I went through a long period where I started hitting major obstacles. And then even when I went back into it, I felt this is so much harder. Why is it so much harder? And then I remember listening to this man who's a theosophist said, oh, that kind of makes sense. That the closer you get to it, it's actually, you're really going into the fire. And it's challenging, I find.
Of course, it's challenging because Now you have to, this is why Israel Regardie called all of this work a kind of advanced form of psychology. You have to deal with all of your programming and the psychological baggage you carry and so on and so forth, and your tendency to get upset, frustrated, and angry, and all this kind of stuff. And this is not an easy thing in an individual incarnation to deal with.
Right.
That's why we have many, 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 many of them before you get to this point for your Buddhist tradition of being the Bodhisattva, the one step before Buddha. It's not easy, but in some respects, your understanding becomes much clearer. And you realize that a lot of the stuff is very simple. It's not really complex.
Mm-hmm.
It's not brain surgery or rocket science. It's a simple understanding of the entire panorama of life and what is really valuable, what is really important and significant to us as living beings and to all of our fellow living beings, whether they're animals or they're spirits or whatever they are. This is where it really comes down to that. And the more you succeed at that, and the more you accept yourself, and the more, using an essential Christian ethic, as I like to call it, forgive yourself and forgive others, the better you succeed. But is that an easy thing? Generally speaking, not in the beginning.
No, and I think we all have different levels of capacity, which I have no particular opinion about. I think one of the things that is important that I learned through a book I read by Jamie Sams, and she did the medicine cards, and she's no longer alive, but she had a combination of, I think, French tradition and some indigenous, and I think some kind of sorcery. And at one point in the book, she says that there's no rush to enlightenment. She said that you go at your own pace, and that's perfectly fine. You can even take a rest, she said. It's fine. You're going to get there eventually. And I really love that she said that, because I think sometimes, at least I have put pressure on myself, and I don't know that really helps our evolution spiritually.
No, it doesn't. And in fact, I like the one way when I had that kind of realization now a little while ago, it's kind of like, hey, none of us are going to beat out eternity. You're going to get there eventually. It doesn't matter. 100,000, 10,000 lifetimes, you're all going to get there. So, don't fret about it. Don't be hard on yourself and judgmental and so forth.
It was a relief, I have to say. And now, one of the things when I was looking at your curriculum, I noticed, is that it seems like at each of the orders, the lessons begin on the left side of the tree. Is that true? And then the way the paths are, they start on the left, most of them. And I didn't know if that was just something, important or not.
I haven't looked. I know that's true for the first order, for the sequential thing, because we're kind of counting backwards. So you start at Malkut, which is number 10. Then you have the path that connects Malkut to Yesod, or Zelator to Theoricus, and that's the 32nd path. And then after those are connected, the next one that opens up is going to be the 31st path. So 32 is there, then 31, you're at Theoricus, and then you get to 30, and finally you get to the 8th path of Hod, or Practicus. So yeah, I can see that there might be a leaning for that. And there's two things that have to do with that. The left side, the pillar of the left side of the tree, is kind of considered the passive pillar. But it's also, since Hebrews read from right to left, it's the pillar of the future. It's your future accomplishment. Okay. So I can see that that's an interesting idea. I need to go back and take a look at these. I mean, I've been studying this for half a century. So there are always things that I'm learning constantly, and it would be interesting to see, to go back and see how that is. I know that is definitely true. There's a little bit of a reverse sequence for the ordeal, because we'll start with this 24th path of the devil, and then go on to the 26th path of death, and then finally the 25th in the middle. So that sequence is altered slightly for very significant reasons.
Now, the diagram is really fascinating itself, because I see new, shapes and combinations, looking at it visually, like that middle section looks like a rectangle to me. And I've been thinking about, what is that rectangle energy where you've got from the tarot point of view, we've got the death card and the devil, and, all in that area. It's so compact. And it just makes you start, what I love about it, just makes you start thinking about it. Why is it that way? And what does that mean to me? And I think that's probably why Now, I know you pronounce it Cabalah, and I say Cabalah, so I don't know what's correct, but if I say Cabalah, it's just because that's what I'm used to saying.
Sure. And part of that is because, I wasn't born a Jew, but spent a lot of time learning how to speak Hebrew. And Cabalah has only one letter that's B, but there's a dot in it in the middle of that letter. Those are the double letters. And that's called a dogish forte. So when it's like that, it means it's a hard pronunciation. It's a ba.
Ba.
If that dot is missing, then it becomes a ba.
Ah.
That's how it becomes soft. So all these double letters that you see, which are for the planets, have hard and soft renderings. And the hard renderings on a philosophical standpoint from classical Judaic Kabbalah are much more materialistic. They're hard edge and whatnot and stuff that kind of, puts on the skids and make things hard. When you go to the soft ones, it's easy. It's okay. That's the spiritual aspect of things. The part that's not going to judge you, the part that's going to say, you have all the time in the world and all that. So that's Kabbalah, means you speak Hebrew. If you want to call it Kabbalah, that's fine, because I hate these invented systems of transliteration, which have gotten people pronouncing stuff in different ways.
Right.
And, I finally said, you pronounce it how it's comfortable for you. Why I pronounce it different, I'll take the time and explain it to you. And that's the short explanation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, actually. So is there, when people, like, for instance, if they sign up for your course and they want to, go through it all, is there a certain amount of time designated for each of the orders? And is there, whether you do it or in the tradition of teaching the pathway systems, is there like a certain amount of time that is like a minimum requirement for people, like to go through, so they spend enough time there?
Well, if they sit down and they read through the first 10 lessons, which is the first order in a night, either they have a lot of experience and they know a lot, or they're skimming through it without tasting all the flavors. It's kind of like, I have Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movie, which is 12 hours long, and I've watched it on and off and on and off, but it's only this last year that I really noticed all these little subtle things that they made an effort to put into the movie, the way the actors are, the writing, and all of this. So I would say that, if you go through it and you want to go through it at a certain pace, fine, but be prepared that you're going to go back and take a look at certain things again. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way that is. I would say go at your own pace, whatever that pace may be. But if you want to read it all and decide that just reading stuff is going to change you, well, it will, but only to a certain degree. And it may not be the intensity that you're hoping for.
I was thinking about this before the show, too, that there's sort of a pro and con of people having access to all material ahead of time. Like, for instance, you can buy, the whole Golden Dawn rituals and everything, rather than having them shown at different stages. And that it seems that it can take away a little bit of the impact of, for instance, if you were going into a ritual. What do you think about it? Like, so the surprise element of not knowing everything ahead of time intellectually can have a positive influence on the psyche.
Yeah, well, it can certainly have a much more intense influence on the psyche. And I mean, when I got it, I read all of those rituals, and then many years later, maybe like about 6 to 10 years later, did I actually experience them firsthand in a ritualistic temple setting. And they had quite an impact on me. In some cases, there were some aspects of them that I did not recall from reading them a long time ago. But the thing is about changes, and particularly about initiation, is that here we are trying to have some sort of personal firsthand experience, which is unlike anything else in your life path. Okay? So all of these guys for our time now in the space age who went up into a rocket or a space plane and looked down on the Earth. And I mean, it's not like flying in a plane where you don't see the curvature of the Earth. Where you go and outside of the atmosphere, you see the big giant blue ball we live on, and you see the depths of space, and the stars don't twinkle. that changes you. There's nothing in your life path like that. And everybody who's been there is a member of a special order of initiation. It has changed them. And that's the thing that we try and do with initiation. And that is one of the reasons why I mentioned that thing about getting out into nature and whatnot. Too much are we closed off from that by living in little boxes and driving around in boxes and eating out of boxes and working in boxes. You know, we are compartmentalized from being integrated to the holistic living organism that we are a part of.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Even if you're living in a city and you simply walk around and you notice the birds, and there's actually a lot more nature in a lot of cities, some of it deliberate. I found gardens sometimes that are hidden in LA that are incredible. I think Michael has a question or comment.
Yeah, just to come back to what you guys are talking about, I remember reading about a tribe in South America, and when they have a child that they think is going to become a shaman, that when they're just an infant, they take them into a cave, and they're kept in the cave throughout their whole childhood until they're 18 years old or until they become a man, and they never get to leave the cave. They're indoctrinated in all the teachings and the spiritual teachings and so forth, but they don't get to see the outside world, and then. When they're ready, when they become an adult, they're brought out at nighttime and they get the first experience of seeing the sunrise and the jungle come to life, and when they're able to comprehend all of it based on the teachings. And I can only imagine the impact that must make on the person. It's got to be absolutely phenomenal.
Wow.
Yeah. That was part of the popularization of sense deprivation tanks, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different things that go on for that kind of training. Part of it is something hopefully that has affected us as a human race, in that there's this cloistering effect. There's this thing about, well, you're going to have to learn to relate to the inside of you because you can't really relate to the outside of you. You're isolated. And there's this thing about realizing that you only partially perceive things, which is the thing about the First Order trying to teach you true spiritual insight. This metaphor of the cave, I think it was Plato's metaphor, where the only thing we see of reality, we're stuck in this cave and we see just little shadows on the wall from what's going on outside the cave. And eventually you get released from that, you go out, you see what the world looks like in full daylight, and then eventually you can look into the face of the sun. So that is a classic form of initiation and spiritual training. And those of us who've been stuck at home and want to go out and socialize, think about the spiritual opportunity of not being able to do that, and then how much more you appreciate it when you can be.
Very true. The idea of getting back more in nature, I really agree with. And also, it'd be nice to start, I suppose there are some places that design spaces, temples that incorporate nature more. You probably see that more with some of the older, like Japanese temples, right, where, because, wanting to practice in nature, there can be an element of risk depending on where what time you're doing it. You want to do something at night. But the times I have, like when I first met Michael and we went to a cove together, our group, and did the Charge of the Goddess under moonlight. I'll never forget it by the ocean. And we trekked in, it was like an hour and a half. And I was really new to it. And it was just so much better. and yet, you can't, at least in LA, it's probably not the smartest thing to do on the beach at night. So, unless you have an army of people. So it'd be nice to see designs of places that include sort of a safety net, and it's more open to allow nature to interact with you while you're doing your ritual.
Yeah. And see, there's the whole thing. You got out of nature and all of a sudden, this was a marvelous, intense experience. And I agree that I've been out on the beach at night and playing with the surf, and the moonlight's reflecting off the crashing waves. And as you do it, it'll come in and try and reach you and grab you a little bit and whatnot, and all this other kind of stuff, which is just, there's nothing to compare to that. It's kind of like, in a way, having a pet or a dog or a cat, in that relationship you have with another being, which is not a human being, but has this sense of wonder and just an unconditional love for you and that kind of stuff. I mean, there are all these lessons to be taught, and that's all that a tradition does, East or West or whatnot, is it gets you to be open and to appreciate this aspect of nature and what goes on inside of yourself because of what it draws out of you.
Right. Right. And also you really get a taste of the elements, whether it's wind or heat or going into the desert. And I think you really feel their consciousness, that they are alive. And especially when you start having interactions that are somehow real with, whether or not, it's the wind or the ocean. And I know a lot of people have that without doing any spiritual practice. They just go a lot, like people that go a lot to a specific natural spot, they start having these experiences naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Long time ago, because we were talking about this beforehand, when I went to the local junior college here in Riverside, I took a class called Native American Thought, which is actually taught by a Hopi Indian. And part of the thing in there was paying attention to all the stuff around you. If there were birds that flew by or a frog or an ant, even, do they talk to you? Is there something involved there and whatnot? And they had a very interesting ritual because a lot of that for their initiation is seeking a vision, as they call it, and spending outdoors at night for a day or two and whatnot, and seeing what happens and so forth and how that changes you. So there is an aspect of that. It's one of the reasons I like the Hermetic path, and particularly alchemy, because they say the very first Bible is the book of nature, written directly by the hand of God or the Creator, and not by any kind of divinely inspired human being. I'm not poo-pooing these other things. But if you look at them, all these other sacred scriptures are kind of based on this. So let's go back to the original first edition and read it. Okay. And that's what I like about that.
Yeah, and I like you really, though, emphasize it. I know other people probably do too, but I can see that you really bring it out whenever you come on the show, and how you really show its value. And I think that's very important for people that are, I would consider you, fairly scholarly, but you also have that real affection for nature. And I think that's important. Because we have, to me, modeling things is the way most people are impressed the most by how people walk their talk in life. And that's why, someone like the Hopi that you went to impressed you. And it's the same with me, with some of my teachers that impressed me sure, they knew a lot, but they lived that knowledge. And that was, they embodied it, the embodiment of it. So perhaps that's
right.
One of the things that might be a quality that becomes more evident when you're on the path, doing all the path work and the 32 paths, that you start to embody the knowledge with maybe you don't even notice it as much as other people do.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where you're going to get the most out of it is you embody it and you live it. And it's not like I've seen some people who claim to be, a master of the temple or an exempt of death, and I'll give you spiritual counseling for just $800 an hour. And you see this kind of stuff, and you go, oh, come on, people, this is ridiculous. That really doesn't matter, because ultimately, when you come to these kinds of realizations, one of the main tests you go through is, hey, what do you really own? Can you own anything at all? No, not even your body. Yet we exist. So what do we own? What is our real possessions? And our real possessions is the experience we have and the memories they generate. And that's it. Mm-hmm. You can't own anything. You can't take it with you. But that you can. That integrates into your soul and your being, your mind, spirit, whatever you want to call it. And that's yours. And it adds to the vast amount of the experience of this living organism, this superorganism that we exist in.
Yeah, and that's our friend of ours who is choctaw. He said the same thing about at death. I forget the whole spiritual end of it, but the deity that he was talking about at death in his tradition, that he would devour your experiences, and the more rich your experiences, that was sort of the better. And it was a positive thing. I don't think I'm probably giving it enough credit, but it really struck me that he was talking about the same thing, that's what you have to offer to the deities, even, that these rich experiences when you pass and when you die. And I suppose that's why you never really know how a person has evolved in a life, because it could be someone that's very quiet and unassuming that has a very rich internal life. And just wasn't their path to share everything with other people. It wasn't part of their path.
Yeah. But ultimately, it becomes accessible the further down the road that you go, because it becomes part of this. We talk about these Akashic records and all this other kind of stuff. What this really boils down to is what the real meaning of this ghost, mysterious Sephira Da'at is, and it's translated as knowledge, and that's what it means. But what is knowledge? Knowledge is experience. All the experience we have is knowledge. Whether you read it in a book as secondhand experience or whatever. And the inner school, for me, told me that Da'at is the mystical twin of Keter. It is the active aspect where you have Yechida as the passive unity. This is Yehud, the active unity. You are now conscious of your unity with everything. And that is knowledge and experience. And it goes along with all this stuff. And you don't see anything that's written like that, you know? It's a lot of kind of gobbledygook, which I like to call it. It's speculation and whatnot. There isn't anything that definitely says it. Well, the last the last lesson of my thing, number 33, has to do with Da'at and all of these various aspects of it, that it's knowledge and it's accessible, which means in a certain level that you can develop, you can have all the knowledge that ever was, is, or will be to be accessible to you and that experience.
Now, I've always wondered, and again, it's mostly from reading the books I've read about different books on the pathways, the 32 paths. Is there any reason why people can't just go directly up the tree and go on only one side of the tree? Is there, I mean, obviously it makes sense to go through every part of the consciousness, but could someone angle up a certain way? Or like I said, is that something that could happen organically, or does that just not occur?
Well, a lot of people get into going up the middle pathway, right up the middle pillar, right?
Right.
And there is no real shortcut. People who do that successfully usually have invested a number of lifetimes in studying the whole system together. And it's kind of like, okay, here's this nice smorgasbord with all this food, but I only want to eat the cheeseburgers. Not interested in the crepes or the filet mignon or anything else. Why would you want to, deprive yourself of all these other wonderful experiences? Are you in such a rush? You got all the time that there is, eternity, like we just talked about. Enjoy it.
Now, on a practical note, because I do many tarot readings, I notice that people sometimes get stuck psychologically, and this is just the positions of the cards, vacillating between the numbers 7s and 8. So they go back and forth and back. And this is because I'll read for the same person. And I was just sort of fascinated by that. And I have have my own particular interpretation of the 8s and 7s. And is it possible that you find students get stuck on a certain path, and what would you do to help them with that?
Well, throughout all of your experiences working in any tradition, you're going to hit plateaus. You're going to get stuck, as you like to say. And the symbolism of between 7 and 8 is kind of interesting, just the basic number itself. 7 represents an entire spectrum or octave of something. There are 7 days of the week and 7 colors of the rainbow and 7 whole notes. And the 7 symbology is very pervasive in that it represents a totality of what you can experience. The number 8 is interesting because the number 8 represents this continuation and higher arcs of things, and maybe even lower arcs of things. Because if you take that 8 and you turn it 90 degrees, what have you got? A lemonscape, the infinity symbol. So it goes on and on and on and on. And there's where it becomes a little hard, that people get into, well, now I've got to the top of it, right? And I'm done, right? No. The process of perfection is a never-ending one. Because as we are, I am convinced, and this is where you go, Jay, you're a wild and crazy guy, that there is various forms that we can express as beings, or maybe as a collective of beings that we've worked with. And I'm convinced that the planet we walk on, once upon a time, billions or trillions of years ago, was individuals just like you and me. And that was also true of the sun. Because the solar system, all these planets are just like chakras in the human aura. So there's a never-ending aspect to our evolution and all the stuff about, Big Bang Theory and this and that. Well, you forget about the theory word. It's not the way it is, even though some scientists will say, oh, we know it all now. No, you don't. A genuine scientist will say, we're perfecting our picture. And of course, these things are changing over time as they discover other things that they hadn't seen or measured or so forth. So this is taken into account, I believe, by any tradition, including Cabalah. There's a never-ending process to this. They say this thing about in every sphere of the tree, every circle of the tree, there's another whole complete tree, and you can go on in that model ad infinitum forever. And it just shows the kind of gradation and perfection and whatnot that you can do that. I mean, physicists will tell you, you can always measure something a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And the more you do, the more infinite the thing becomes, which is a weird paradox, but it's true.
Yeah, I remember trying to visualize that once, and it really broke my mind. All the little trees, I'm like, I can't even. It's enough to even try to do one tree, and then the 4 worlds and all that. It's quite challenging as a visualization, I find, but worth pushing your mind because I study Tibetan Buddhism. They are really big on really, really complicated visualizations, and I've decided that it's okay if you can't do it, like that it's a practice, and the practice itself gives you something by trying to do the visualization and say, okay, there's this syllable dancing in the heart of Tara and mantras all around it, and in that way, I don't know, they reminded me of each other, the tree and some of the pujas in the Tibetan Buddhism.
Find all these philosophical similarities. It's just a matter of approach to the way they do it. Yeah. But it's the kind of thing where you eventually will get there and you'll realize that it's kind of like when you let go of your rational, calculating, quantifying mind, you have a much easier time experiencing this stuff and experiencing it on a very direct level. Because emotion is what gives energy to anything, particularly if you're like into theurgy or magical practice. I mean, here's a perfect example. You see this guy with his baton. He's called the conductor of an orchestra. Let's think of him as a magician with his wand. And here he is. And you can just see the emotional energy pouring through this person as they do the thing. Guess what? The profession of being an orchestra conductor is one of the longest lived professions that there are. Why? Because of this energy of emotion. It's not purely an analytical thing. It's a much more feeling thing. There have been anthropologists, because technology has become shrunken, that they've hooked on to dervishes who do all these dancing rituals and whatnot in mystical Islam, a thing that monitors their heartbeat and other stuff, and all the telemetry goes to a central place. And what they discover is here's like 20, 30 guys doing these dances and twirling and whatnot, and very quickly their heart rhythms synchronize.
Wow.
They all beat at the same time.
That's
they have
beautiful.
One heart.
Wow.
And you see, these are these other dimensions of ritual and of experiencing the unity that there is out there. And these people knew about this. They had got to it, hundreds and thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Now, before we get to the end of the show, how can people sign up for your course? And is this something that's going to be live? Is it something that's both?
Well, since I'm just starting it out, it's going to initially be PDFs that I would recommend, if you like it, to print it out, put it in page protectors, and stick it in a 3-ring binder. We are giving away the very first lesson and the outline for free, so that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You can see what that's like. And then you can contact me directly. We have a link to one of the websites that's already carrying my free download, but you can also contact me directly. And this is in the website under your guys' website, under my contact information, called by names and images 8, the number 8, at gmail.com. I'll be happy to send this stuff on to you, and hopefully it goes. But while it's not going, there's thousands of people taking the course. To everybody who takes it and whatnot, if they want to use me as a kind of an answer guy or pick my brain or a little bit of mentoring, I'll be happy to set time aside to either like Zoom with them like this or talk over the phone or whatever is helpful to them, because the idea is to spread the light. Now, the other people that I'm partnering with, like Spagyrius and then eventually FLO at L.V.X.org, is to help us kind of generate a little bit of an income. The course does have a price, but if you're challenged financially, talk to me about that, and we can see if we can work it out. That's not necessarily a barrier to having access to this information. I don't want it to be.
It's very reasonably priced, isn't it? Was it $150 if you buy all of it at once?
Yeah, if you buy just them in sections, like for the orders, as you were saying, they're like $60 a piece, which means a total of all three would be $180. But if you pay for it all up front, we'll discount that by 30.
I think it's
for $150.
It's very reasonable, considering it looks like you get from, if you'll, the syllabus you sent me, you get a tremendous amount of information. So.
Yeah, and then you notice at the end of each of these lessons, which are not very long, I'm not making you read pages and pages, there's a glossary which defines terms, something I think every book on the occult should have, so everybody understands the terms being used. And then the other thing is we have various diagrams and sometimes artwork and whatnot. And those, I haven't priced it out or whatnot, but you can talk to me. I can create a graphics poster format of that, between letter size all the way up to 13 by 19. And we have a practice if you wanted to see those things as a standalone, because I've spent over 12 years designing my own study materials for stuff like this. And that's why I'm trying to give you something that's very comprehensible. We do new translations of the Hebrew because there's a lot of stuff that's been mistranslated, misunderstood. It gets the thing that we talk about Kabbalistic worlds, Kabbalistic universes, and really it's just a four-part creative process. There's nothing separating one thing from the other, and all of this, there's a way to understand that. When I was learning, I was like, what is this? Four worlds and how they fit together? I can think of it like this. And all that stuff is largely due to translations which took the word olam, meaning eternity, and wanted to turn it into world or universe. Eternity simply means eternity. It didn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an end. And there are four parts to it.
Yeah, I think translation has been a problem throughout the history of a lot of religions, including the Bible. Some of the mistranslations have created real problems, whether it was deliberate or not, but it's an ongoing thing. So, but I think it's a really wonderful idea, and, it's coming from someone that, like you, that has not only studied it, but you have worked with it and used it. And I think that for me personally, the teachers I've learned the most from, whether it's just a school teacher or a spiritual teacher, are definitely ones that have invested in the path themselves. And I think there are people out, or at least enough long enough in the path to, have integrated and experienced it and know some of the pitfalls and some of the things that, you can sort of help people get past them a little easier, because that's one of the reasons for having a teacher, is to make it a little easier for the next student.
You got to have a guide.
You got to have a guide. And once in a while I get really annoyed with some of these new age people think the Aquarian age is, we don't need any kind of teachers or gurus. And I have a thing with people thinking all gurus are bad too, because it's just not true. And I think, can you imagine a world without teachers? I mean, I can't actually.
And they misunderstand that word guru. They want to equate it with sage. And it doesn't. It just means someone who can teach you something. You can be a guru to someone else can be a guru to you, because you don't know everything, and you can teach other people who don't know what you know. And this is where, again, the translation is very important. It gets equated with something else, and it doesn't mean sage at all. No. So
yeah, there's definitely, and then it also some of the famous gurus that turned out to be despicable people, but that's true in all religious figures, right? It's not just gurus that have that problem. But anyway, I guess we are getting close to the end of the show now, and I thank you.
Oh, darn. This has been nice.
It was great having you come back again and talk about this.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
You're most welcome. I'm sure you'll be back again. We really enjoy having you and all of your knowledge and insight. And thank you, everyone, for listening in. Tune in next time as we continue to journey and talk about the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great week.